Hi, folks. Good day. The webinar will begin in about 1 minute, so just hang in there. We're giving time for people to log in. People are logging in quite rapidly, and we'll begin within the next 45 seconds. Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in today's webinar, Fare Free Transit Options, Actions, Pilots. We will hear from several transit agencies giving careful consideration to fare free transit. For technical reasons, we'll not be able to take live questions today over the webinar. However, please, if you do have questions, email them to APTA. Use my email address, agazzetti@apta.com. And we'll confer with the fellow panelists and respond to your questions. agazzetti@apta.com. There's much interest in the topic, and with continuing developments in this area, there will be an additional webinar in the upcoming year, and we'll do a deeper dive into the topic. It's my honor to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Joel Valinsky. Joel served as director of Broward County Transit from 1983 to 1993, then became the director of the National Center for Transit Research at the University of South Florida until retiring in 2017. Joel has served as president of the Council of University Transportation Centers. He is in the Florida Public Transportation Hall of Fame. He is a member of numerous APTA and TRB committees and the author of multiple published reports on how to improve the performance and the relevance of public transportation. Among the many TCRP reports he has authored is the one that sort of frames the topic for today's discussion, the implementation and outcome of fare-free transit services. Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Valinsky.
Art, thank you very, very much. And welcome to everyone that has called in. The number keeps growing, and that's very encouraging. We look forward to this webinar, and we hope it provides you with some good information, not necessarily to say it's good for you or it's bad for you and your system, but it will give you information that will help you determine whether or not you think it might work in your service area. So next slide, please, Lee. We will have two panelists joining me during this webinar. Anne Freeman Manzanares, the General Manager for Intercity Transit in Olympia, Washington, which is going to be starting their fare-free service or zero fare service in January in just a few days. And John Ando, the Executive Director and CEO of Central Midlands Regional Transit Authority, the COMET, in Columbia, South Carolina. Next slide, Lee. So I thought we'd start out with just some basic definitions so we have a common understanding of what we are talking about when we talk about fare-free transit. And in this case, we are talking about public transit agencies that allow all passengers, and by that we also include paratransit passengers, to board all of their services without paying a fare as they board the vehicle. And that would apply every day, all day. In that case, there's no media, monthly passes, or anything of that nature, or any kind of money counting functions, because you've taken the fare out of the picture and allowed people to board the buses and trains if need be at no cost to them at that point. But as we know, when we say fare free, nothing's free, and someone is paying for the transit service. So rather than call it fare-free transit, some people do call it a zero fare service. Now, this is gaining a lot a lot of interest around the country and around the world. And it's been in place since about 1960. Little system out in Commerce County, Los Angeles, has been doing it since then, and they're still doing it 60 years later. UMTA, or what FTA was called at the time, funded some pilot projects in the late 1970s, in particular in Denver and Trenton, New Jersey. And while the ridership went up very strongly in both of those communities, the results were somewhat mixed because they only instituted the policy during off-peak hours. And so it was hard to tell whether this was truly do it on a pilot basis. Ridership went up as high as 45% more than what they were doing, but they did have a lot of complaints about overcrowding and late buses and some rowdy behavior on the buses as well, and they discontinued the pilot projects at that time. The next one we'll call People's Eyes. We're down in Austin, Texas, where Capital Metro implemented a totally fare-free service from from 1989 to early 1990. So it was out there for about 15 months. And again, ridership went up as much as 75%, but again, they had mixed results, and they needed a lot more maintenance to take care of the issues they were having with the buses with more riders. They did have a lot of truants who were riding on the transit system, and the drivers themselves actually started to complain and took it to their policy board and said, we don't want to do this anymore. It's very difficult for us. And so after 15 months, they decided to discontinue the service, the fare-free service. And a lot of people, I think, thought at that point, well, that's kind of the last fare-free service anymore. But really nothing could have been further from the truth. And as it turns out, you can show the next slide. The concept of zero fare or fare-free transit became very popular, but in particular kind of communities. And now, as we speak, there are over 50 cities in Europe that offer fare-free service. And in the United States, there's over 40 such systems that provide fare-free service. And by that, when I say system, I'm talking about a system that receives federal funding. It can't be any sub-grantee. We're talking about somebody that has a direct relationship with FTA. And in the United States, among those 40 plus systems that are using zero fares, virtually every one of them fall into one of three categories. It's either a small, urban, or rural system. It's a resort, sort of a ski resort type of an area usually, or a university-dominated areas. Next slide, Leigh. This is a picture of a map of where all of these systems are located, the 40 plus systems, and you can see they're everywhere from the northeast to the southeast to the west coast and in between in the mountains and in the heartland. They're generally speaking, the largest system is out in Hawaii, or in terms of population, they have 175,000 people there. And in North Apple Hill, they tend to be the system that carries more passengers than anyone else, with 7 million passengers a year. Next slide. And what the results have been, the one thing that everyone notices, without exception, is that ridership will go up, and the ridership metrics will improve vastly. Metrics like passengers per mile, passengers per hour, your subsidy per passenger will go way down. But, there will be some other expenses and such that we'll talk about in a moment. But I've tried to provide a few examples here of some of the systems that reported in the TCRP report. And if you look at the third column where it says actual increase, in New Hampshire, they experienced a 32% increase in 1 year. In Oklahoma, Edmond Transit had 200% in just 8 months. Glenwood Springs, Colorado, 125% in just 4 months. Corvallis, Oregon, 43% in 2 months. And in Montana, they actually, I'm not sure what the word for it is, it went up by 6 times, from 200 a day to 1,200 a day. Next slide, Leigh. And where it is being provided, it is virtually unanimous that it's a popular service within the cities that they operate in. In some places, the cities have become the best places to live, and they're very proud of the service they have. In the smaller areas, in the small urban and rural, they can make a good business case because the amount of money that many of them take in through the fare box is so minimal that they're almost costing as much to collect the fare as the total fare is collected. And we just, why don't we, in fact, we might even be able to make money into John Ando later on in the presentation. We'll make that case better than I can right here. In university-dominated towns, you have universities that sell universal passes to their students. And those towns said, well, wait a minute, the students are riding around town not paying a fare when they board, but everybody else in our town does have to pay a fare when it boards. And the optics are not good. In many cases, it's the minority people that are the only ones that are paying fare as they board, while all the students are getting on what looks like for free. They do pay a student fee, but it's a very small student fee. Well, universities wanted to do this to better integrate with the overall community. They wanted to avoid building more parking garages. They wanted to have some impact on their carbon footprint, reducing that. And so they like to do it. And in the resort towns, primarily the ones you saw on the map that are in the Rocky Mountains, but there are a few others, they want to get people out of their cars and into a safer vehicle like a bus that they've got of ice and snow. And people are going to reach their pockets and get change from the fare box. And they also have, both in the university setting and in the resort towns, crush loads of passengers where it's a great advantage to allow people to board through both doors. It helps speed up the process a great deal. However, one of the other results is that fare-free transit doesn't typically attract as many choice riders as the transit systems would have hoped. What they tend to see is that people who had been using the system, or people that were riding bikes or walking, are the ones who tend to get on the service more. Doesn't mean they didn't get any choice riders, but perhaps not as. Next slide. Now, in addition to these somewhat smaller systems that have been implementing this type of policy around the country, a number of larger systems did look into it. They were very, very interested for any number of reasons, to try to reduce congestion in their downtown, to just to encourage more equal access to opportunities throughout their region. But what they found is that there's involved in doing away with the larger systems. Here's a quick example. You can see in lane transit, not a real big system, but they were collecting as much as $500,000. They found they could save as much as $500,000 if they discontinued collecting fares, but the fares they lost were going to be $5 million, and they'd have to put another almost $5 million into new service each year. So that was a big nut that they would have to deal with. $10 million difference is just too much for the folks in lane transit. Same thing at San Francisco MTA, although the numbers are much bigger. They could have saved $8.4 million in fare collection activities and expenses, but they would have lost $112 million at the fare box. They'd have to spend $72 million more for additional service because of the additional capacity that they would need, and the greater number of buses they need to maintain their frequencies, and another $500 million or more for more capital, more rail cars, more buses. And that, again, was just more than they could swallow. And TriMet took a close look at it too, and they found that they would also have some expenses that would be difficult to make up for. They just could not go forward at that time, 1998. Next slide, Lee. Now, even though those 40 plus systems have been operating that way for a number of years in most cases, there is this increasing interest in zero fare transit, fare-free transit, for any number of reasons that we all know. That transit ridership generally has been declining around the country, not in every system, but in the majority. There's a greater about income inequality in the country, and the desire to allow people who are in lower income brackets to be able to reach all the opportunities that they possibly can. Traffic congestion is picking up again, as it did some years ago. and the whole concept of climate change and what can we do when transportation contributes about a third of all the carbon into the atmosphere. So we find that the larger urban areas that don't fit in with the patterns noted earlier are now expressing interest. And you've probably seen this in some of the reports around that you read. Tallinn, Estonia, a city of about 400,000 in Europe, instituted it a few years back. Luxembourg more recently instituted it in their area. And in the U.S., Kansas City now is going to be able to claim their largest city in the country and in the world to institute zero fare policies. They have over 400,000, perhaps 500,000 people in their service area. And even Los Angeles, California is starting to talk about it. Paris, France, gigantic system. And Miami, some people in Boston. And in some political parties, the Green parties, they push for a policy of this sort. So it's once again come to the forefront. And we're very, very fortunate, Leigh, if you can go to the next slide, to have a couple of transit managers that are with us today who are right at the precipice of starting their zero fare policy, and they are here to help tell you their experience and what they've learned and what they're going through. The first speaker will be Anne Freeman-Manzanares. She is the general manager and CEO of Intercity Transit in the state of Washington, Olympia. She's been with that system for 27 years as the chief executive for the last 7. She's a graduate of leadership at the, serves on the board of NTI, and she has served the last 6 years as an executive officer of the Washington State Transit Association as well, serving for 3 years as its president. Locally, she serves on the board of regents for leadership of Thurston County. She's on the board of the Thurston County Economic Development Council and Transportation Choices Coalition. I'm very happy to introduce Anne Freeman-Manzanares.
Great. Thank you, Joel. We started our journey more than 4 years ago, and it was really around the fact that we had a budget shortfall looming. Going zero fare wasn't our end game. Having the community define their values and what they wanted their public transportation system to look like was our goal. We embarked on an intense 2-year public engagement process. It resulted in a ballot measure that contained 9 elements. 8 of those elements were related to specific services, increasing span and frequency, introducing new service into new areas. The 9th element was a promise to study the way fares were paid. It was clear that this was an issue. People were coming at it from different perspectives, and we recognized that we didn't have enough time to study this adequately and have an answer that we felt comfortable with before the election. So we promised we would study the issue post-election. We have a lot of support in our community and trust, and feel very fortunate that the measure was passed by nearly 66%. Prior to the November 2018 election, we were authorized to collect 0.8% in sales tax, which is the majority of our revenue. Our community voted for an additional 0.4%. That's 50% more funding that we were receiving prior. We have increased service by 25% over the last year, which is approximately 51,000 service hours, and we've hired 130 people since January. And true to our word, we started studying how to change the way fares were paid in January of 2019. Before I go too much further, I have to give a shout out to Jason Robertson from JRO and Company, who was instrumental to our successful public engagement process, and to Thomas Whitman and Christina Barone from Nelson Nygaard, who led us through our study. They and their associates have been so incredibly helpful and insightful throughout this process. So next slide. Here's a quick system overview. Our service area has a population of approximately 190,000 people. We serve the state capitol. We have lots of visitors during legislative session. And we're just about halfway between Seattle and Portland and have great access to multiple national parks and the beautiful Puget Sound. We have 2 universities and a community college that serve approximately 10,000 students, and we're located about 30 miles south of Tacoma and 60 miles south of Seattle along the I-5 corridor. Next slide. So the 9th promise in our ballot proposition was to explore the way that fares were paid. We heard that access and equity was very important. There was a desire to ensure that our low-income, elderly, and disabled population could get where they needed to go. And they wanted us to help individuals and families with their transportation costs so that they could better afford housing, healthcare, childcare, and food. There were comments about removing more psychological barriers to ridership. People don't carry cash. They don't know how to board and pay, and it's embarrassing as an adult not to know. They aren't going to pay to ride 5 blocks, but they will get in their car to make the trip. But if it were free and they could just jump on board, that would make a difference to them. They wanted us to get them where they were going faster, reduce pollution, congestion, help individuals get to jobs, and help employers get employees to their job site. And the list just went on. Next slide, please. Our fare collection system is old and failing. We were anticipating the need to make a capital investment, and we were going to need to do so quickly. There was a community preference to use the same fare collection system that is used regionally, so customers don't have to manage multiple payment systems. We discovered we couldn't join the regional fare collection system immediately because it was in the process of being replaced, and it likely wouldn't be available to us for several years. We talked about the possibility of going with an interim fare collection system and decided it wasn't a good use of taxpayer dollars. We actually went through an exercise where every division in the organization did an evaluation of what we would save if fares did not exist. We looked at hard costs for things like passes and armored car services to staff time, whether it would be eliminate positions or allow us to use those staff hours in a more productive way. For us, when we subtracted the estimated initial investment in the yearly operating cost of the more sophisticated regional system once it was available, along with our estimated expenses, in a 5-year scenario, it would cost us more to collect than what we would gain. In the 10-year scenario, we collected more than we expended, but the dollar value spread over that time was fairly insignificant. It certainly wasn't enough to cover the expense of what we could achieve with the 20 to 60% ridership growth. And it certainly wouldn't have accounted for all the other potential financial, social, and environmental benefits we could see. It is surprising to most folks, and it was actually a little surprising to us how much it costs to collect money. Our net fare revenue is approximately 2% of our overall revenue, where otherwise we would say it varied between 8 and 12%. Then we started to consider, what if new or expanding businesses considered zero fare transit as an incentive to select a particular community in which to locate? The financial benefits of that are exponential. Or what could the colleges and social service agencies accomplish with the funds previously dedicated to purchasing transit passes for their students and their clients? Could they keep people in school? Could they move people out of poverty? And additional riders means the service we put on the street is more productive, economical, more environmentally friendly. Our authority and our community is very holistic. They believe in our mission statement to provide and promote public transportation choices that support an accessible, sustainable, livable, healthy, and prosperous community. And we tested concepts with our partners extensively. They liked the idea of finding a way to go fare-free prior to the election for all of the benefits it could bring. We talked about soliciting funding partners in the community, similar to what Missoula, Montana is doing. And I'll just give a shout out to Corey Aldridge, who has been incredibly helpful as well. But after the election, partners unanimously told us we supported an additional 4/10 in sales tax. That was a big ask. We've already given you permission to be transformational, so go be transformational. We studied the literature, like Joel's work, and talk to other systems about what worked well and what didn't work so well. Some systems found that capacity became an issue and they were going to need to pay for the additional services, which is, of course, expensive. We are in the process of expanding our service, so we don't anticipate that will be a problem. Our expansion plans call for additional employees. We'll have to see once we roll this out if our staffing plan is adequate. We heard from smaller systems that incidents didn't grow significantly. It was commensurate with the growth in ridership. That may not have been quite true with some of the larger systems. So we're working with our staff, community partners, and the community at large to be clear that zero fare doesn't mean zero rules. We still plan to enforce our rider rules. We are implementing the advice we received, looking forward to seeing how this unfolds. We have some new buses out on the road operating on our most densely populated route now that do not have fare boxes. And the initial word is that we are running ahead of schedule because they are not collecting fares. So that's a good sign. Of course, that could create some other issues in terms of running hot at time points, but our assumption is that with the increase in ridership, that will balance out, but we'll continue to monitor that. And we did talk in general terms with the community, like public schools, like public libraries. The service is taxpayer supported. We pay for it, as does anyone else who shops here through sales tax. We simply do not have to pay at the door for this community supported service. And that's why our board decided to go with a zero fare rather than fare free concept. So next slide. And with that, I have my contact information listed here, and I will turn it over to John.
Okay, John, can I go ahead and introduce you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, John is the executive director and CEO in Columbia, South Carolina. He has a strong passion for public transportation, and in fact, he's been working in the transit industry since he was 13 years old, working as an intern at the Santa Clara Valley Transit in San Jose, California. He became transit manager, though, at the Riverbank Oakdale Transit Authority, working for a board of directors and implementing an intercity transit service, and has run many systems since. He began leading the Comet in April of 2018. John has overseen the preparation of short and long-range transit plans and strategic plans for the transit systems he has managed. He has a robust understanding of the FTA grants, funding programs, and compliance, including obtaining direct recipient status from the FTA and preparation of compliance documents. He has started many small urban and rural transit systems, as well as implemented transformational processes to make them efficient and progressive. So, John, with that, we're looking forward to your story as well.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So at the Comet, we generate approximately $2.7 million in fare revenue, which is about 9.12% of our overall budget. We spend about $380,000 a year on fare collection. We also learned that we give away close to $1.2 million worth of free service, and that service is covered, in essence, by our sales tax revenue, since someone has to pay for that free service. However, we also generate $150,000 in revenue to cover free rides based on agreements that we have with various colleges, schools, universities, and private businesses. We've also learned that our Gen Fare capital costs continue to increase year after year. This past fiscal year, we spent close to $150,000 on Gen Fare upgrades and products alone. Next slide. So we have been asking the question on what is the cost of free, and how do we better address equity concerns so that we're providing an equitable system to everybody throughout our service area. We believe that there's no one can ride for free, even if free is allowed. And we're looking at the public school and the public library analogy, and how in those cases property taxes generally fund the basic level of service at no cost to those that use the service. And then in those cases, you have people that may never use public school, like for instance, they don't have children, or they may never go to a public library, but yet they're still paying for the cost of that service because it's an essential community service that is needed. We have a downtown circulator service called the Soda Cap Connector. It's been running since 2017. And another question that we've been asking is, Why should visitors who own cars and generally have higher incomes receive a free ride on a downtown circulator versus low-income residents who travel daily and in our case spend $500 a year on public transit have to pay for a service? And then the last question that we posed to our board is, what is the basis of determining who rides free and who pays? We've never had a consistent policy on who can ride free, and you'll see in the next slide basically how many people are getting a free ride on our services, which are in essence being subsidized by taxpayers. Next slide. So in the case of third parties where we get $150,000, these are the various organizations that actually pay the Comet to allow their either students, employees, faculty, or whoever benefits or participates in that organization to ride the Comet for free. So it allows us to cover the operational costs. That includes all of the school districts, several of the colleges, several of our medical facilities, a few businesses, and then also the Gamecock Express, which is a service that takes people to the University of South Carolina Gamecock football games and basketball games, and then any special event shuttles. Now, if you look at subsidized by the Comet, all these, this is where we basically pay close to $1.2 million of people to ride our transit system free of charge, based on all of these groups that are able to ride our services for free. Next slide. If we're going to consider implementing a fare free pilot, one thing that we're really looking forward towards is the potential increase in federal funding. As you look at this slide here, you'll notice that we're very similar to the North Charleston urbanized area. Basically, we have similar populations, similar land areas, similar density, similar revenue miles, and close to similar low-income population. However, and similar operational costs. Where we're significantly different is on passenger miles and total passengers carried. And in the FTA formula, one factor takes into consideration is passenger miles. So Charleston, in essence, gets approximately $848,000 more in federal funding than us, even though we almost have close to the similar urbanized area specifications. So the question that we're wondering is, if we were able to gain 1 million passenger trips a year, and then we take into consideration that NTD takes approximately 2 years to determine funding, could we be equivalent in federal funding to the Charleston urbanized area, based on, of course, how other transit agencies across the country in urbanized areas are able to demonstrate their increases or decreases in passenger miles? Next slide. This gives you an idea of our ridership since the creation of the Comet. We didn't report NTD for the first 2 years of the Comet's creation, but since 2004, it's basically attributed to the level of funding that we have provided. Back in 2009, when we expended our transitional funding from the previous private electric utility, we had to make a 45% service cut. Hence why you see a significant reduction from 2009 to 2013. When our sales tax passed in Richland County in the latter part of 2013, we started restoring services, and we've seen continuous growth since 2013 up to 2018. So we believe that if we were able to do something innovative, such as a fare-free pilot, we will also see some ridership gains, which can help yield additional federal funds to our urbanized area. Next slide. So some takeaways that we've concluded from our initial analysis is that we anticipate that if we went fare-free, just based on some surveys we have done in the community, that we would gain about 25 to 30% of an increase in passenger trips. But this is merely by the fact that our existing ridership base will make more passenger trips on the transit system. It may not necessarily yield new riders to the transit system. We've proven this by doing a half-fare test last year where we discounted our 31-day passes by 50%, and we saw a 26% increase in ridership for that 4-month period. We also believe that our current system design, which is a radial hub-and-spoke system, which basically originates 127 years ago is not conducive to the choice rider, and therefore we would see very small choice rider growth in our system until we do a network redesign to better link our passenger trips with employment sites and trip generators, which we just kicked off that study in conjunction with Jared Walker and Associates. So we're hoping to have a redesigned system in 2021. We also have to be mindful that paratransit will also become fare-free. And with paratransit becoming fare-free, that could result in additional paratransit ridership growth and the need for additional vehicles and service hours that is paid to our contractor. And there could be some implications of safety and security that the Comet will need to prepare for, such as homeless populations riding our routes all day. And that's one thing that we're experiencing on our downtown circulator. And we want to be mindful that should we pursue this pilot, that we have the appropriate resources in place to make sure that we don't disrupt the rider experience. Next slide. The initial cost to the Comet for a 6-month period is what we're looking at, will be about $1.3 million. And if we wanted to do it for a 1-year period, it'll be about $2.3 million per year. We generate about $2.7 million per year, and we subtracted the cost of what it costs to collect fares, since we'll no longer have that cost anymore. We have some revenues available that can cover our initial pilot. We're looking at using our FTA funds, since we are eligible for operational assistance, since we do run less than 100 peak buses, even though we're a large urbanized area. So we would use that up to our operations assistance cap. We're getting ready to launch a program to allow all seniors in our service area to ride for free based on a grant we got from the Older American Acts Fund through our local metropolitan planning organization. That's going to start later on in the spring. We also will look at some discretionary grant funds from Richland County, hospitality tax, the accommodation tax, community development block grants, since we are going to be implementing a low income pass program, and or some 5310 funds, should the board want to continue this pilot, continue beyond the initial pilot. We also believe if we're successful in 2 years that we can get up to about $1 million more in federal funds, depending on our passenger miles growth when compared to other urbanized areas in the state, in the country. So our service committee, based on our analysis that we discussed with them in December, would like us to prepare 3 scenarios where we're looking at a completely fare-free for a 6 months to a 1-year period, a fare-free that's once a quarter for an entire month, so that'll be 4 times a year, or a fare-free that's once a month for 1 week, which would be 52 times a year. And as part of that, part of those latter 2, looking at changing, if we were going to change the way we collect fares, making a reduction of our overall free programs that are subsidized by the Comet. Next slide. My contact information is below, and I'll be happy to share our initial findings and results. And thank you for allowing me to make this presentation.
Okay, John, thank you very much. Very interesting, and as well as Ann. And I see that we're running a little over time. It's my fault, but the attendees who have been listening are hanging in there. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask just a couple of more questions for you, both of our presenters, to see what your experience has been in a couple of areas. My first question is, who is the champion for this concept, this policy in your community? Was it yourselves as the CEO? Was it the board of directors, the chair, the mayor? Speak to that.
You want to go first, Ann? Sure. It was really a cooperative effort. It was an idea that our steering committee was very much in favor of, and staff was the one doing the presentations to those steering committee members, and our board jumped right on board. And as soon as we started going out and having conversations with our broader community, there was a lot of appeal. So I would say it was very cooperative unfolding of support.
John?
In the case of the Comet, it was basically a staff-driven initiative. We were in our room while we were preparing the budget, and we were just looking at our overall costs and what could we do to reduce costs to be more efficient. And then we pose the question, what if we did go fare free? What value would that bring as it relates to additional passenger miles and reducing our costs, and also being able to make the service more accessible to everybody in the community and resolving the equity concerns that we have identified in our initial analysis.
Okay. Now, Anne, I think that your program is designed to last 5 years. This is not a 6-month or a 1-year pilot?
Correct. 5-year demonstration.
Mm-hmm. That's commitment. And is there any, I guess there's always an opportunity for a board to say, well, we'd like to revisit this, but you anticipate it will go the 5 years.
Absolutely. And there is always that opportunity to revisit if that's necessary, but they wanted to really give this an opportunity to be successful. The other issue for us is we need to replace our fare box, and the system that the community was most interested in going with actually isn't available to us. And they're still in development stage, so we're not exactly sure when they're going to roll that out. So we wanted to allow us enough time to have that system roll out and to be able to redo the facts and figures around the monetary cost of instituting such a system.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have either of you had any kind of blowback, from, let's just call them, real hard conservative folks that say that, hey, when somebody's receiving a service, they should pay for the service. Everybody else is paying for it except the people that are using it, it seems. Have you had any of that kind of comment coming back to you, John?
Yes, actually, I have one board member that has expressed concerns about going fare free and what implications it can cause to the comment. And that's why we are taking a more cautious approach to doing this, and we're wanting to look at doing this in smaller increments to see how does it affect us financially and make sure that we have the necessary funding to cover it. Because that's one of his biggest concerns. And then he's also using the same analogy, well, I don't have any children in public schools. I don't use the public library. So quite frankly, I don't agree with having to pay taxes for those services to be free. And therefore, I'm not also going to agree that we should make the transit system free. That's really the only opposition we've heard. We've also heard from the community on the positive side that they believe that this will help generate additional help low-income folks be able to spend more dollars within the counties that we serve, as well as being able to have more access to transportation.
Right. From the operational point of view, and I think you mentioned that you've already got some of your buses running fare-free on some of your routes, and they're actually able to complete their routes more quickly. But do you anticipate as the ridership grows, and you probably have to make more stops, and you have to decelerate and accelerate to get back on the route, will it start to be a problem for schedule maintenance?
Well, we hope that it won't be a problem, but we are hoping that that happens. So we just went through a system redesign and have readjusted the timing on our routes, fully expecting that we might need to play with that timing. So we are finding that we are running ahead of schedule right now, but are anticipating that with additional ridership that will balance out. But we'll just continue to pay attention to what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. John, have you taken that into consideration as well?
We have. We do have excess capacity in our system, and one thing that slows down our routes is fare collection. So we are of the opinion that going fare free will speed up and also potentially fill up some of that excess capacity. And if we experience routes running hot as a result of this, we will make proper adjustments. It might even allow us to possibly expand some routes a little bit further, since our system does run primarily on a half-hour or hourly basis as a result of it.
Okay.
So it's going to be experimenting to see what actually happens once we do it.
Okay, last question for both of you in terms of operational aspects is the issue of security on board the bus. Many people have, many different systems initially said that, wow, we experienced rowdiness and folks that just jumped on, jumped off because it's free, made a lot of noise, upset existing passengers. Some people even said we lost a few existing passengers. Can you tell me the steps you're taking to address that, to prepare for it, and to help make sure it doesn't get out of hand? Ann?
Yeah, there is a concern, although small, that zero fare would mean zero rules. And so we've released FAQs internally to talk about, we'll still be enforcing the rules that we enforced before. And I think there's real community buy-in in terms of being able to continue this service. And at our public meeting, we had probably 60 people come, 30 of them spoke, and there was just a real sense of camaraderie or solidarity in the room, that this was a good thing for us as a community. And I think that there's some monitoring that goes on among our passengers, and people become friends and that sort of thing. So I think that there's a real sense out in the community that if we want to make this work, we need to mind our P's and Q's as well. But in addition to that, we're doing outreach to the schools and our partners to ensure that people know how they need to behave when they're on the vehicle. Our interest is getting everybody where they need to go as quickly as possible, and everybody needs to behave themselves in order for that to happen. But we are hiring additional operations supervisors to in accordance with our expansion plan. So we're hoping that the operators will feel the support from our operations supervisors as well.
Same thing.
And in our case, we last year adopted rules of the road, which is basically our passenger code of conduct, so that passengers have an understanding of what it takes to ride our transit system. We also have contracts with the City of Columbia Police, City of Casey Police, and Richland County Sheriff, and they actually have officers that ride our buses randomly on a daily basis to help enforce those rules. We've also empowered our contractor transit operations supervisors to enforce those rules, and we believe that should help us as it relates to the safety and security issues. As part of our rules of the roads, which our supervisors and law enforcement definitely enforces, is the number of times you can ride a particular route. We say in our policy that you can ride a route for one complete round trip before you have to deboard the bus and wait till the next bus comes if you want to continue your trip. This prevents folks from using the buses as like a shelter. We want to make sure
mobile shelter.
As a mobile shelter. We want to make sure that we're taking people from point A to point B only. And we found by having that policy and being consistent in its enforcement has helped reduce people from trying to use our vehicles as mobile shelters.
Okay, great. John, and thank you.
Go ahead. Also going to be in a social worker in the first quarter of 2020 that will be working under contract to the comment through our local homeless shelter organization, where they're going to basically be, instead of trying to put laws towards people that may violate our rules in place, that they'll help connect resources to them. So as we see homeless folks that may be riding our buses or in our bus shelters, this social worker will be talking with them and helping them get access to services so that they don't necessarily have to be a detriment to the transit system. And we feel that that's great value by having this social worker.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, on behalf of APTA, I would like to thank Ann and John in particular for sharing their experiences. Ann, you start January 1st, do you?
Yes.
And John, how about you?
We're looking at March 1st.
March 1st. Well, I just want to wish you great success and good luck, and we look forward to finding out more about the results of your services. And I just wanted to wish everybody a happy holiday season, and thank you all for tuning in. And as Art Gazzetti had mentioned earlier, we anticipate with all the growing interest in this subject that we'll dig into this a little bit deeper next year in 2020 with 2020 vision. So once again, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you for facilitating this.